Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session of the PhenoLab. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Manuel Reyes. Dr. Reyes is a psychiatrist, and he has also a mastery in philosophy. He currently works as a psychiatrist at the Clínica Alemana de Santiago and at the University Psychiatric Clinic of the Universidad de Chile. There, Manuel teaches and works as a researcher in 2 units, respectively in the Humanities and Philosophy of Psychiatry unit and in a Psychosis unit, where he is currently part of the clinical team for a project on people with at-risk mental states as part of the Prescient Network. From this academic year, he will be professor in charge of the psychopathology course for the residency in psychiatric program of the university. Congratulations, if I may add.
Thank you.
He's also director of the psychopathology of psychosis course that he has been teaching since last year in the psychosis unit for mental health professionals in Chile and Latin America. Manuel, thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Francesca. First of all, I would like to thank you for your kind invitation. I've been attending PhenoLab for, I think, a couple of years now, so it's truly an honor for me to be on the other side, I mean, like presenting, no? So I'm very happy, and I was wondering when you invite me, what can I say? You know, lots of like huge professors and names in PhenoLab, so I think I came to the conclusion, so to speak, that I'm a clinician, no, a clinician and a practitioner and a teacher of psychopathology, and from that viewpoint, I think I can make some contributions to the discussion. No, so just as you said, from this year I am in charge of the clinical course of psychopathology for the residency of psychiatry at my university. So I think this would be a nice way to have some ideas of you. So this is work in progress, as people said. No, I know that Enise is also a clinician. Stefan, I read a lot of their work also. So it will be nice to have input of their own experience. So now I'm gonna share my screen. I don't know if you can see. You guys can see it, okay? Great. So this is the title of the presentation. I changed it just a little bit. It's called "You Should See Patients on Learning and Teaching Psychopathology," and I add the notes. So these are some thoughts on this road. So as I was previously telling you, I was wondering what kind of talk I could give here in PhenoLab, and my talk is gonna be or have some resemblance to the talk by Professor Bizarri as a journey on what is like for me to the student, practitioner, and teacher on the field of psychopathology. So I will try to cover in this journey three steps or three periods of time: as a student, as a practitioner, and as a teacher. As a student, I will develop some thoughts on the importance of seeing patients, the need of the method and a rigorous one, from seeing patients to the encounter, to the clinical encounter, the need of a guidance in this process. Then I will move forward to a practitioner stage and hide some lights of the danger of dogmas or a dogmatic view, reading as a source of new insights and doubts, and moving on from the encounter to the relationship, and in relationship with relation, and to the understanding in the clinical relation. And finally, as a teacher, I ask myself what kind of psychopathology we want to teach, the necessity of philosophical foundations, and moving on from a disease, an illness, a symptom, to situated human beings that are suffering from a mental disorder. No, so there is 3 stages that are presented like in a timeline, but of course they are happening at the same time now. No, I'm now a teacher, but of course I'm a practitioner and I always be a student. And finally, I will add some final remarks. So just to some kind of like introduction, I will start with a story, with an anecdote that it's not mine, but it's some kind of, it has some kind of relation with me. And I think it's useful for introduction, as an introduction to the topic. So here is where I work, the clinical psychiatric hospital, or of the Universidad de Chile. And here is my country. Yes, you can see it in South America. I know you, many of you know it, but it's always is better to remind. And in the middle of the country, here is the capital that is called Santiago de Chile, and the clinic is located in a sector called Recoleta. So we are at the center of the country, and the place is called Recoleta, and it's near of the mountains of Chile. So we hope to get some snow this year. So this clinic is one of the main places where students study psychiatry and become psychiatrists. And here is one of the professors of the big names of the clinic, and his name is Professor Armando Roa. He's passed away, but he has or had a huge influence on the psychopathology formation of the students here in Chile. He has more than 20 books on clinical psychopathology, but also he has articles published on philosophy journals, articles on Descartes, Spinoza, Bergson, Kierkegaard. So he was a man who read a lot, and he was some kind of like a very wise man. That is what his students said. No, he wrote on a wide range of humanistic topics, and he made interesting critiques on psychoanalysis, ethics, culture, adolescence, and drug abuse. Although he did not speak German, he had a stay in Spain, and he had a friend who speaks German and French. So he had access to a German tradition. And he is one of the main professors that promote phenomenological psychopathology here in Chile. No, he coined some terms that are useful and that are applied here in Chile for the assessment of clinical cases. One of those is the lack of vital purpose, that is, of course, in depth of Minkowski, reluctance, the collapsed intellection, and he has his own definition of autism. He was named Master of Chilean Psychiatry and by the National Psychiatry Society of Chile. And only on those topic of schizophrenia, we will have an entire presentation, but I think it's fair to notice them or to remark them. And this is a paper that is published in the late 60s in a philosophy journal here in Chile, and it's called the Clinic Phenomenological Method in Psychiatry. It's very richful, and he makes like elaboration of the phenomenology in psychiatry in the clinical practice, and elaborates on themes as the dislocation of intentionality and the loss of communicability, in psychosis. So also deep philosophical rooted clinical topics, but we here only mentioned today. And this is Professor Silva. This is my professor. No, I didn't know Professor Roa, but Professor Silva met him and studied with him. And Professor Silva also a master of child psychiatry, many books, many articles. He has two sides of development. One is the investigation side. He works on biological determinants of mental illness and psychopharmacology. But in a clinical setting and in the teaching setting, he's professor of psychopathology and one of the continuators of the psychopathological tradition developed by Professor Roa. He's the one with I will be taking care and taking part of the psychopathology course in the university. So here is the anecdote. No, here is 1979. At the center is Professor Roa, and at the left of the screen is Professor Silva. Many men in that picture. Hopefully today will be different. I know how to say this, or Francesca will give me the eye. So here is the anecdote. Here is Professor Roa, here is Professor Silva, and Professor Silva always tells this story. He was walking down the aisles of the clinic. He was beneath his arm. He had John Bloyler's dementia precox. So he ran into Professor Roa, and knowing he's a man that read a lot, he asked him, "Professor, which book should I read?" And he tells that it was kind of like giving the importance of the reading as a part of the formation. And Professor Roa says, "Don't read, go and see patients." No? So this is an anecdote that Professor Silva always tells to remark the importance of seeing patients. No? So I study in the clinic. The clinic is a very academic place. So we got difficult cases, but we don't see many patients. Paradoxically, because it's an university place, so to speak, we have referrals, but we don't have the truly connection with the public network of psychiatry here in Chile. So paradoxically, Professor Silva says, "Go see patients," but during my residency, I don't get to see that many patients. No, I see many patients. I saw many patients, but not the amount that I think it would be important as a part of a formation. So I end my residency and I go to work to this public hospital that is called Felix Bulnes. It's a huge hospital. One of the 5 big hospitals here in Santiago. It has like 1 million people under control, like population. So it's really, really big. And here I learned a lot. They also, here is another professor called Mario Varela, who is also studied with Professor Roa and had a long tradition of phenomenological psychopathology. They were mainly clinicians. And it is important to say that because it relates what I'm going to show next. They has a formation of psychopathology, and in a way that one can think that they are a Jaspersian and a Schneiderian account of psychopathology. They were very rigorous in the methodology. So it was very interesting for me and to see the kind of descriptions that they will made about the phenomena of the patient, you know. Entonces, so I learned a lot about them. It was mind-blowing for me. And in the first month that I was in that hospital, I saw many patients with the diagnosis of psychiatry than in my whole residency. So it was like a really, really ritual environment to keep learning. But And here is the but that is always including a phrase now. They had a really broad concept of psychosis, and the understandable was at the center. No? And they will teach and will practice some kind of rigid form of psychopathology. And I will develop some thoughts on that. So they have a lot of practice. They will read Jaspers like rigorously, some parts, I would say. So it was a very good place to the first part, that is see patients, no? But then again, returning to the anecdote, Professor Silva always said this anecdote and tell them in different ways. So first they said, Professor, which book should I read? Professor Reyes said, don't go read, go and see patients. And sometimes he adds this last part, that is, and then you read, no? So we will return at the end of the talk to this reflection. So now I go on and go over the different stages. No, one as a student comes from a medical formation and have to endure this task of learning the phenomenological method. It's a difficult task. It's a difficult because you have to learn the phenomenological attitude, and it is some task that requires time, requires practice, and requires rigorously. So of course, I'm not going to describe the phenomenological method because everyone here knows it, but in the clinic, the first thing we learn is about the importance of description. Description, the phenomena within the phenomenological method, and of course, trying to achieve the bracketing of the world. No, bracketing of the world is at the center of the practice, but it's also a difficult stage to accomplish, and also one can discuss about if it's really accomplishable goal or it's more of a theoretical one. One other challenge that you have to meet is the difference between form and content. As a human being, we are paying attention always as the content. So paying attention to the form, it is not easy. It is not easy as if you're having a conversation and putting attention to what you're saying me, not how you're doing it. So for the students, it is difficult to be with the patient, keep the attention of what they're saying it, because you are interested in learning what is going on with them, but at the same time, be attent or be looking at the form of this content. So we have to isolate the phenomenon, and we have to have a clear representation of what actually happens in the patient, and this is not just like a form of saying that or like something that has no importance. It has a huge importance, because in psychiatry we cannot see as other physicians what is going on. The traumatologist can see a fracture in the bone. We cannot see. The only way we can access to the other is by the other telling us his experience, and we can represent us what he or she is telling us. So the exercise of representing us what the other is saying to me, it's not easy also. So we're trying to give space to the patient, to the phenomena to appear, not to try to conceptualize it immediately under a category or interpret it. When the students are beginning, they tend to name the phenomena. For instance, they say, so the patient has an hallucination, it has anxiety, but they don't really know what's happening. because they go and name it, they put it into a category too fast. And in this way, they lost what it's really going on. And this is something that we have to train and that one have to learn over time. So phenomenology, says Jasper, sets a number of tasks. And these tasks in the field of psychopathology are really important ones. To give a concrete description of the psychic states and to review its interrelationship, delineates them as sharply as possible and differentiates them and create a suitable terminology. That is, you can call it descriptive psychopathology, no? But as I already said it, since we can never perceive the psychic experiences of others in a direct fashion, as with physical phenomena, we can only make some kind of representation of them. Conventional theories, psychological construction, interpretation, and evaluation must be left aside. We simply attend to what exists before us, insofar as we can apprehend, discriminate, and describe it. Experience shows that this is by no means easy to do. No? So that is one of the reasons why people stop learning and teaching psychopathology, because you require a teacher, you require time, you require the motivation to learn and to devote time to learn the process. Because you can say it from a theoretical point, but with the patient that is always a human being, that is always a distinct and particular human being, with an interview that is always different, this exercise is therefore challenging. So when the title of the talk says you should see patients, it's a trap, so to speak, no? Because you don't merely see a patient, no? You have an encounter with them. But also with the student, this happens. He begins at the first stages of learning, seeing patients, seeing them as an object. And this is something that teachers must address to accompany them in the process of learning. So we're moving from seeing to observe. Jasper said this is not a merely see. The seeing is not done through the senses, but through the understanding. This is something quite special, irreducible, and ultimate. And if we're going to take a single step forward in phenomenology, we have to train ourselves in it and master it, including such things like representing data on oneself, understanding, grasping, or actualizing. So we don't see a patient. We observe the phenomena, we encounter the patient. But this process is something that happens gradually on the formation, because we have to remember that psychiatrists, and that is the population that I am addressing, comes from a biomedical formation. They see signs and symptoms. They don't usually, hopefully they will see, but they see people. They're trained to see symptoms. So they have to de-learn, I don't know if it is the right word, but forgive some aspects of the information and take new ones. So in this stage, we have to move from see to observe, and to observe, we have to have like a framework. And the framework is phenomenological psychopathology. And this framework is applied in the psychiatric interview, because interview is not just a conversation. It works as a conversation. It has some features of the conversation, but it's not just a conversation. So students begin to wonder how to ask, how to properly ask a patient, so we can move forward and understand what is really going on with him. And the pragmatic result of this method is mental status examination. I mean, mental status examination is some kind of a rigid structure, but gives us some kind of structure for the student to learn to conceptualize and to put some order in the description of the patient. So, but this method, and this is always, one can think of an example, no? The description of that when people call us to see a patient is crying and he wants to die. And this is the description, no? But the truly description that you accomplish with the phenomenological method put into a mental status examination is much more informative and much more ritual than just a few words. But we need rigor in that. And what other things that happen to the students, and they start to see, they begin to observe, but they are fixed with what I call it's called my attention. No, I mean, you say patient and say, it's called my attention. I don't know how you say it in here, but it's called my attention that the patient said that when he goes to the street, he get the feeling that they are watching him, and they only see that. No, I mean the students. It's not only what's called my attention when meeting the patient; it's the whole picture, and then we can move on to what's really like the more specific phenomena. As any ability, it takes time and practice and the need for feedback. No, feedback is really important. And in this process of from seeing, observing, and from seeing the person is starting to emerge or to appear. No, first we see the symptom, then when students are like training and they talk about the phenomena, but in objectifying the phenomena, it starts to work as a symptom also. No? So when talking about the what's going on with the patient, we start with the symptom, but then we know and we learn that the symptom is just in this conceptualization a sign or a signal, so to speak. But we want to address the phenomena, what is really appearing in the patient, and it is nothing behind. No? So with the phenomena, we get to see that is a gestalt, an organization of phenomenal aspects, and that the patient doesn't have anxiety for one side, sadness on the other side. It has difficult to sleep on the other side. It doesn't have energy on the other side, like things that were independent one from another, but it has a gestalt that makes me realize that is like an organization and a link between these phenomena that are not isolated things. No. And the gestalt gives me also the ability to hypothesize diagnosis in a better way. So in this process, from starting from a pure biomedical stance to develop the abilities and the theoretical formation of psychopathology, I think we need guidance. No, learn to proper interview. It's difficult. It seems easy, or it will maybe seem easy from the outside, but it's a difficult task. It's an always renewing task. It's always a new patient, a different person. See your professor interviewing and resolving challenging situation. It's also a way of learning. You can model your own practice by learning and seeing how your professor resolve these challenges. Knowing different kinds of interview, yeah, and by that I mean that you have to be able not to have a rigid and one only formula, but to be able to navigate between different kinds of interviewing. And again, the feedback for improving, and that is that interviewing is a multitasking endeavor, but because you're watching, you are active listening, you're observing the formal characteristics of, for instance, thinking, you're planning where to go next on the interview, and you are present interview. This is very important also, because in the beginning, the students are like an observer of the patient. And in an interview, you need to be present also, not just observing, asking and observing. Asking and observing is not the same as being present in the interview. So teaching to practice is very important. And I think that all of the clinicians here had the same experience. When you go and see a patient with a trainee, with a student, and the trainee student said, but professor, the patient never mentioned that to me. And it's only now saying it, and they feel like some kind of betrayal of the patient, no? But obviously it's not that, and is that learning to interview, it's difficult, no? And you have to know how to ask. So it's not it is not a betrayal. And so we started with seeing, we're moving to an observation, and finally we're reaching with the encounter. And why is this also so important? Because we need to switch from the third person perspective to the second person perspective. We need not only be able to observe what is going on with this person that we have in front of us, but we have to relate to them and be able to empathize with them. That is not only a quality of a good human being that one can say, no, but it is, of course, but it's also important to the methodology. To be a good clinician and to do good psychopathology, you need to move from the first person perspective. You have to move from an interrogatory to the encounter. No, we need some information, some inputs from the interview, but some ways of accomplish that, someone can say, is checklist, no? But in the encounter, it's not only information that we get, but a relationship that we build. So we move from the third person to a second person, and we instill in the interview the intersubjective dimension. Intersubjective dimension is really important because the phenomenological psychopathology does not only entail to recollecting information or data, but how does this relationship establish? No? And here are many works on the, for example, atmosphere. To be able to feel an atmosphere, you have to be in the interview. No? And there have to be a relationship from me to you and from you to me to be able to grasp those pre-verbal aspects of the relationship. So, and this is one of the things that I will remark later on happened to me in the second place, in the place where I see lots of patients. It seems to me that they have more of a third person perspective, no? And the third person perspective, it's useful for investigate phenomena, but it implies in some way that I am an anonymous observer, and I am never an anonymous observer. I can be aware of my viewpoints, of my epistemological commitments, but being neutral is my opinion, at least. It is impossible, and it is also not desirable. No? I want to speak with a human being when I go to a doctor, not to the computer. for instance. So only when we move from the third person perspective to the second person perspective appears the intersubjective dimension of the interview. And one have to acknowledge the impossibility of a aseptic examination, one that physicians and medics, and psychiatrists in Chile are always medics, wish for an aseptic examination because it gives us a sense of objectivity. You know, if we can be neutral, we can reach the objectivity about what is going on with this patient. No, so there is an interesting work. I reading through the presentation, I found the work of this investigator. I don't know if it is correct. The name is Cholokova. That he addresses teaching and learning psychopathology and addresses this concept of neutrality or as they say it, the viewpoint of nowhere, and critiques it. So it's really interesting. So if someone wants to read it, and the question is this a bias or is this a way of to empathy? No, I think of course in some way it is a bias, but is a price to pay for a human connection, and to understanding the complexities of this situation. No, we're not assessing an object, we're assessing a human being, and we're also human beings. No, so we move from cases like a presentation of the clinical case to patients and to persons, no? Persons that are suffering from a mental disorder. And this movement, I think, is important in an ethical point of view. So I'm going now to go to, as a practitioner, this is nostalgia. Maybe some of you have saw it. So I think it's like relaxed association of me, but I think the keeping the light alive, it's somehow related to the work of psychiatrists. So I going back to the scenario or the picture where people are really good psychopathologists, really good mainly Schneiderian psychopathologists, with some input of Jasper's, I would say. But what is the problem with that, or what is the I think is the problem with that? Some classical clinical psychopathology, once you get it, is very useful and it's not that difficult. Okay, once you get some kind of clinical psychopathology, it's useful. It's a well-constructed building. You have from within, you don't see many flaws. No? You see this is great, but relays on a third-person view with input from the third-person perspective. That is not the same from having a relationship. No, in some way, in the practice revolves about getting the material and processing it, and so with some kind of objectivity. There is an use and abuse of the ununderstandable. What I mean by that? I mean that in some clinicians, the concept of understandable works as a really key component of the evaluation, but a key component of evaluation that sometimes forgets the one that is making the understanding is me. Not only the person is trying to make herself or himself being understandable. So some clinicians think that they can reach a point of the ununderstandable with a kind of objectivity, and I think that is a problem. And what is a problem? Because we're forgetting about here is a relationship, And it's a problem because the ununderstandable in clinical psychopathology is like a key mark of psychosis. This way of think about psychopathology pursues objectivity, and there begins like more a conceptual problems, but with huge clinical consequences. Even though psychopathology and phenomenological psychopathology stands in somehow like a critical posture of neurobiological reductionism, in some way, by going in an in search for the essences in clinical practice and transforming the diagnosis in essences and transforming in fixed essences, the danger is that it becomes some sort of neurobiological reductionism, but from psychopathology. No, searching for objectivity, looking for from the third person, and believing that once that the case is diagnosed, then the diagnosis is a reality and that is fixed, cannot change. And also against the Jaspersian really view that argues for pluralism, it often includes other perspectives. It can find an use, but an use not at the same level of clinical psychopathology. So this, I think, is a problem that has to be addressed to move from this building that is classical clinical psychopathology, and that is taken to practice in some way that is too essentialist and too rigid. So here in Chile, I don't know how they say in Italy, I think it may be the same, but here in Chile we say, son más papistas que el Papa. And when someone gets involved in a trend or in some kind of knowledge, they become more rigid than the creator of that. No, so I think they are more Jaspersians. They think they're more Jaspersian than Jaspers himself. No, but one thing of Jaspers is that it's a huge book and you have to read it, not just the parts that are interest of you for the phenomena. No,
Manuel, if
yes?
I can just translate the Spanish sentence for the other
Okay,
people that are not fluent in Spanish, it sounds like the Pope's supporter are more conservative than the Pope himself, something like this.
Yes, just like that.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. So, but Jaspers, I was just rereading it. I think it's incredible, the book. So I was searching for everything. Yeah, I found this sentence. This Jasper says, everything creative usually tends to be converted into an absolute. The creator, however, experiences enthusiasm and a sense of fruitfulness, not the ruin. It is his successor who pays for the enthusiasm, becomes one ideated and sterile, and acquires a vested interest in the legacy, in being right because of it, and in the power that lightly won knowledge confers. So, in a way, there is an alert, a warning against becoming dogmatic, because I believe that if one is too rigid and too strict to being kept in the classical phenomenological psychopathology, one can become dogmatic, and I think this is always a danger that one should be aware of. So, what can we do about that? We need to move between psychopathologies, between descriptive psychopathology, between clinical psychopathology and structural psychopathology. Structural psychopathology For instance, being Spanger, Jasper was very critical about him, but in a way, it gives us some kind of other perspective within phenomenological psychopathology and help us to understand better what is this going about. So I'm gonna move a little faster. The importance of the diagnosis in some rare cases. I mean, diagnosis is important in medicine. In physical medicine, is huge. In psychiatry, is also important. But in some rare cases, help us find out a etiological mechanism is the less frequent case, but it helps us to establish a treatment plan. It helps us to be able to provide prognosis. It helps us with the communication with other health or mental health professionals. It gives the patient healthcare insurance. And for the patient, the possibility to elaborate and understand what is happening to them. It's a way to help them also. But in psychiatry, the assessment of a case diagnosis, says Jasper, is the least relevant factor. No? If it is the main issue, it will prejudge what ideally should emerge from the investigation. What matters is the process of analysis. The chaos of phenomena should not be blotted out with some diagnostic level, but bring illumination through the way it is systematically ordered and related. We don't have to resign to the diagnosis. Diagnosis is important, but diagnosis cannot be the center of our practice. It's an important part of our practice, but when I see myself and when I see students, in some way, students initially begin the interview or the conversation with the patient, trying to grasping rapidly those points that help you make a diagnosis. And then they try to reassure that this hypothesis the rest of the interview. So it is important that we left diagnosis at the end. Methodologically speaking, it is important because it turns into a bias. Psychiatric diagnosis is too often a sterile running round in circles so that only a few phenomena are brought into the orbit of conscious knowledge, says Jaspers also. So Stangelini says the focus, and Broom says the focus on diagnosis discourage attention to real people experiences. As a consequence, clinical utility is confined to ad hoc bits of information useful for clinical decision makings. No, one only see what is important, and if this important is the diagnosis, we see the symptoms. If the important is the person, we see their experience. I think the diagnosis, it's a work in progress always, and it's dangerous to think it about as an essence. Diagnosis is a concept, not a thing that people is, but a concept that helps us understand what is going on with them. And entonces, so we have seeing, observing, encountering, and then building a relationship. Encountering over time, it opens the possibility to a real relationship, a therapeutic relationship, but a relationship. It gives the patient the opportunity to opening the real intimacy of their life. It's a unique relationship. It is a therapeutical one because you have to you are able to establish a bond with the patient, and from the interaction, this interaction becomes therapeutical if it's think as one. No, what happens in this relationship? The limits of the understanding begins to move because I know more the patient. It moves because the patient is able to address more deep issues of their life, and it moves because we are able to engage a more profound relationship. It does not mean that we need to leave the understanding out of the table. I think it's a truly important concept in psychopathological practice, but we have to be aware of their own limits, no? And in a relationship, one can truly enter and begin to know the life world of the other. So for this process, we in the student moment, we saw the importance of the guidance of the master, of the professor. Here in the practice or the practitioner moment, you have to keep reading, and you have to read as a sort of new insight and doubt. And I have been some kind of critics of the clinics that only read Jaspers, but I have to be very clear about that. I think general psychopathology is master, but it's a huge book. It's difficult in some way, and no one reads it completely. No, so you have to read Jaspers. So it will take many years, I guess, but I keep returning to the book and finding new things, and I think no one has seen this before, and I go and check that in Jaspers elaborately, profundely that I have ever read. So you have to read classical phenomenological psychopathology, but you have to move to also to contemporary psychopathologies, because they are because the human being is not always complete, and so the psychopathology it must never be ended. Now, if it's ended, it becomes like a rock. It doesn't work. And here is also a note that two other topics that are not of the phenomenological psychopathology field, but I think it's important information. And you have to read some kind of philosophy of psychiatry and critical psychiatry. I think the word people like Neve Jones or Wojtek Koister, it's really important to think about our own work and to not become dogmatic, because if you want to read only one author, you can master it, but I don't know if that helps really the patient. And philosophy of psychiatry, I will say, because the problem of what is a mental illness, of what is a disorder, of what is the normal of the abnormal is really well treated from these authors. So of course you can also look at in phenomenological psychopathology, but I don't know. I would think that to work on the normal is the abnormal, you have to go back to Husserl, you have to go back to really deep Husserl, and we're clinicians. So I think you can do it, but it's really difficult. And I think philosophy of psychiatry, from an analytical point of view, it gives a much more easy entrance to physicians. Physicians are more they used to read papers, so they can read a paper on what is mental illness, and it would blow her mind. So as a teacher, and I don't know, Francesca, how much time I have left.
Let's say 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, maximum. Okay. 15, okay.
Maximum. Maximum. Okay. So as a teacher, so here I became more like a evidence-based medicine specialist. So I go and search for papers, and here is some studies about teaching psychopathology. Here's a study of the 2015 by Fiorillo, and it's a survey with the biases of the survey, but it's interesting that in the table of the left, of the total of the interviewees, 100% think that psychopathology should be at the core, but also there are a great number of people that say that they are not interested, that this is old-fashioned, that it's not useful, and they lack of time. No? And the formation on psychopathology, this is all from European countries, is mainly clinical, and phenomenological is a small percentage. So the resident says that they what are they lacking for? They would like to use they would like to know how to use rating scales. They would like to have time free to dedicate to books and papers. We all do. They also would like to availability of senior supervisors and discussion groups, and that is something we can work on. No? So here is a paper that is from this year. Is a Delphi study. So they gather like a lot of experts on the field, and they will ask like a methodology to ask them what they think it's important to teaching descriptive psychopathology. So it is interesting that the last slide was residents, students. Here are like the professors, no? And the professors also agree that what we need is direct supervision, observation, discussion, and feedback. We need to see patients together. We need to have clinical encounters together to learn because as Professor Roa says, you don't have to only read, you have to see patients, but you see patient with someone who can teach you how to interview, how to observe, how to engage in a meaningful encounter with the patient. So the professor says direct supervision, train supervisors, observe the supervisor, and here is something that I think is also not always says, but is something really important, emphasis on ethical. And here is the legacy of Bill Fulford, values-based clinical practice, reinforced didactic training, and also indirect supervision. So what kind of psychopathology we want to teach? And here is a book of, I don't know if you know him, is Ignacio Bonet, is a psychiatrist from Spain. It's a very rare book, but it's wonderful. It's only in Spanish, I think. So he begins to wonder what kind of psychopathology, and he says that psychopathology right now is without the human being, without limits, and without the unethical impulse. So what we want to teach is psychopathology with the human being, not only as a mirror of as someone who gives us data, but a human being with limits and with ethical impulse. So about that, Jasper says psychopathology is limited in that there cannot be final analysis of human being as such, since the more we reduce them to what is typical and normative, the more we realize there is something hidden in every human individual which defies recognition. So we need philosophical foundations. I already speak about that. I think phenomenology, of course. That doesn't mean that we have to turn ourselves into philosophers, because we're not. Philosophers do it much more better than us, but we have to have some kind of foundations, no? Because when people says, when clinicians think about the phenomenological clinical method, they think about delimited symptoms, and that is not phenomenology. So to know what is phenomenology, you have to read. Philosophical psychiatry, I think it's an important input. Again, not to become a philosopher, but to know and to wonder and to question of us what is a mental illness. It is because as we came from the biomedical field, in the beginning we think mental illness as an essence. And if no one tells us that this is a at least a problematic declaration, then people keep thinking that, no? So the only way is to question that and to be aware of that. So Jasper says, many psychiatrists have said that he did not want to burden himself with philosophy and that this science has nothing to do with philosophy, but the exclusion of philosophy, it will nevertheless be disastrous for psychiatry. If we're not clearly conscious of our philosophy, we shall mix it up with our scientific thinking quite unawares and bring about a scientific and philosophical confusion. We have to distinguish the different modes of knowing and the clarity of methods. Philosophy, therefore, creates the space for all operations of knowledge. Within this space, knowledge finds its measure and its limitations, as well as the ground on which it can maintain itself, grow practical, and gain in content and significance. So not the symptom, not just the phenomena, not the gestalt, not the illness, but a situated human being. So here is a proposal of several authors. I think Stangelini is one of the main, but it's also here Professor Rovaletti, that is a philosopher and a clinician from Argentina. And she says that psychiatry differs from all other medical specialties, in that the dimension of the human subject is fundamental there, since the symptom is not only a sign of the disease, but is also signification, the signification of a meaning. From this perspective, the phenomenological approach offers a new concept of subjectivity, where mental pathologies are not seen as deficiencies and deviations from a norm, but also constitutive moments of human existence, that is, essential modifications inherent to the being of the man. Whereas symptomatology is strictly illness-oriented, psychopathology is also person-oriented, since it attempts to describe the patient experiences and her relationships to herself and the world. So here's, I'm not going to go over this because Francesca is gonna give me a look that I should end it, but this beautiful chapter, long and beautiful chapter by Stangelini in this book, An Experiential Approach to Psychopathology. It is from 2016, and here they argue for a person-centered approach. In this context, the patient is seen as meaning-making individual, a self-interpreting agent engaged in a world shared with other person and whose individual values and experiences are key aspects of his or her self-understanding. It complex the things, but it gives like an ethical and a more clear picture of what is happening in front of us. So they argue for a person-centered psychopathology, multidisciplinary, empathic, and human and value-friendly. So for ending, psychopathology as the basic science of psychiatry is at the core of the training of residents and moreover is present in the everyday work of clinicians. Phenomenological psychopathology provides a robust methodology to assess and comprehend the psychic phenomena of those with mental disorders. But it's not just that. It's not just a methodology. It's not just a tool. So to be aware of that, you have to have some theoretical foundations. Requires a careful balance of encounter with patients and solid theoretical foundations to do so, while acknowledging the immeasurable of the human being and the complexities of his context. A teaching program on psychopathology to address questions about the nature of mental illness and the delineation between normal abnormal and its relationship with the pathological. Psychiatrists come from a background in the biomedical model, so they need this questioning. Philosophy of psychiatry, to question the foundation of the clinical practice and the phenomenology, not just as a method, as I said earlier. So I argue with Jaspers, but beyond Jaspers also. For a person-centered phenomenological psychopathology with limits within a pluralist education environment with an ethical commitment. So for doing this, we have to have clinical encounters with patients, plus a theoretical background and plus clinical supervised training on the education. So Jasper says, an educated attitude in psychiatry depends on our experiences and a constant use of your powers of observation. No book can give us that, but it also depends on the clarity concepts we use and the width and subtlety of our comprehension. And it is this which I hope this book will enhance. So Jasper's already said it. And this is truly the final one. This is a poem. This is a poem by a Chilean poet. His name was Rodrigo Lira. So it's in Spanish, and I translate it in the right. And it says, it goes like this. I warn you that I'm not a psychotic. They call me crazy, but to those who call me crazy, others in turn call them crazy. Such as you say skinny. Sometimes they'll call me skinny, and a really skinny guy calls me fat. But to you and you all, I warn that really I am not crazy. Despise the labels vulgarly called diagnoses that have been applied to me by specialists and understanding ones, moistening the rubber of the labels with plastic sponges, the hands gloved with latex. Thank you very much.